of phantoms and monsters. They exist among us, and sometimes they win. Even the devil was an angel once. The world has its own rules, and these rules are not human. Some of us seek answers to the origin and existence of cryptids and the unexplained. Join us as we venture beyond the known and accepted boundaries. Welcome to our nightmare. I think you're going to like it. Hey folks, good evening and welcome to another episode of Phantoms and Monsters Radio, where we explore the strange and the unexplained. I'm your host, Lon Strickler. Thanks for joining us. Now, if you enjoy our content, please like, subscribe, and share. Also, leave comments. We like to hear like to read what you have to say, what do you think about the show and about the guest. Super Chat's active during the show, so please show your support of Phantoms and Monsters Radio by clicking the dollar icon under the chat. You can also support the channel by using the Buy Me a Coffee link. Sorry about that. Your consideration is very much needed and appreciated. Tonight, W.T. Watson joins us again, and he's a coffee addict and a writer of both fiction and nonfiction. He infuses his work and his expertise in cryptozoology, monster lore, magic, Forteana, and the paranormal. He brings a unique shamanic and magical perspective to all his work over the 30 years of exploration in these topics. When he is not writing or reading about monsters, he can be found outdoors, allowing his dogs to take him for a walk around his neighborhood in Kitchener, Ontario. He lives with his spouse, Stacey, in a townhouse that would be jammed with books if it weren't for e-readers. Travis recently published a book with Beyond the Fray Publishing titled Canadian Monsters and Mysteries, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And Travis, thanks for joining me this evening.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Lon. It's a pleasure to be back on the show.
And we have Bernadette joining us again tonight, and so she will be having her show soon, A Paranormal Life, so look for that, folks. Should be interesting.
Hi, Lauren.
So,
Hi,
Travis.
Hi.
So tell us about the book. Tell us a bit about why is it general cryptids, monsters, and whatever roams the backwoods of Canada?
Yeah, these are the questions that I love because I can just say yes.
Okay. Okay.
People who've read, Mysteries in the Mist know that I cast my net pretty wide. That was my previous book. This book came about specifically because I ended up living in Canada. I was born in the U.S. And recently in 2020, my spouse took a job at the University of Waterloo here in Ontario, and they're a native Ontarian. We moved up here in the middle of the pandemic, which was a whole other story to tell. Mm. And of course, being who I am, I started thinking to myself, well, I wonder what kind of interesting things go on in Canada. Because one of the things that I noted, when I moved up here is that there's a very definite divide. You have the United States, and then you have the Great White North, which a lot of people in the States seem to assume is this vast ice flow that exists above the United States, where nobody lives except for Inuit and polar bears. And that's just not the case. Canada is the second largest country in the world. It has the largest coastline in the world. It has over 10,000 lakes that are over 3 square kilometers. Vast wilderness areas, and most of the population of Canada lives within 100 miles of the U.S.-Canadian border.
Absolutely.
So there are vast swaths of wilderness area here in Canada. And thus, there are all kinds of interesting stories to tell. As I got to exploring these stories, I discovered very quickly that I was going to have to cull some things out and maybe break those off into separate books. The Sasquatch phenomena, for instance, is just wild around here. Although people may not be familiar with things outside of British Columbia, I'm actually working on a book now that's called Beyond BC, and it will be Sasquatch sightings and my take on things in the provinces of Canada outside of British Columbia.
Mm.
Also, the other thing I couldn't cover in any detail would be hauntings, because just here in Ontario, in the little area that I live in southern Ontario, there's tons of ghost and haunting stories that I could cover at some point in time. I also chose not to because there are researchers who have already done a great job with these phenomena. Decided not to do Champ, which is being very ably covered by another researcher, mm-hmm. and Wendigo, which is Chad Lewis just released a terrific book on that subject mm-hmm. not too long ago. So and so you think, well, what's left? And I'll say to you, all kinds of things are left. This book has cryptids, it's got UFOs, it's got phantom ships, you name it, it's in there. And lake monsters. Canada, like I said, has lots and lots of lakes, and it has tons of lake monsters stretching from one end of the country to the other. So I got started on that, went down the rabbit hole, and here we are again.
I used to live in Hamilton. Now, I didn't live there long. I lived there less than a year. I was younger then. But that time was, the big story back then was the St. Catherine's poltergeist story.
Okay.
And, of course, people were talking about it. Of course, Hamilton is tucked in between Toronto and St. Catherine's. But as time has gone on and as I've gotten involved, and look, I took a lot of stories even back then from people mm-hmm. who were telling me a lot of weird stuff, especially in southern Ontario. But the one thing I have found more of than anything else in Ontario are winged humanoids mm-hmm. and dogmen.
Yeah, I actually have a section. I do talk about dogmen somewhat, mm-hmm. and I believe there's an Ontario story in there. I have a section in the book on Owlman sightings in Ontario. Mm-hmm. Which, when we think of the Owlman, we think of Cornwall, England, so on and so forth. But there were actually sightings of a Owlman type creature in Ontario dating back to the 1800s. And this creature was said to hang out in graveyards and, wilderness areas around dark. And, apparently there were like 100 or so Ontario farmers of that time period who reported seeing this thing, which they described as being a sort of a tall humanoid figure mm-hmm. with either wings that came out of the back or actually the arms were wings. Again, as I say, several people encountered this thing. Several people reported encountering it. So who knows how many people actually did see it. But that's just one of many really bizarre encounters that you find in Canada. Like I said, I didn't get deeply into hauntings for mm-hmm. the research for this book, mm-hmm. but they're certainly there.
There's a lot of hauntings.
There are forts here that are supposed to be deeply haunted. There are houses even in the Toronto Metroplex that are supposedly quite haunted as well.
I have had a lot of cases in Toronto. Mm-hmm. I have worked a lot of remote cases in Toronto. There's certain, even downtown, there just seems to be a lot of areas that have a lot of hauntings.
Toronto's an interesting place to just walk the streets and. Probably the deepest layers of history that I've ever walked through, as far as kind of your psychic sensitivity to thing was New Orleans. You can't walk 5 steps in the French Quarter without encountering some really strange energies here, there, and everywhere. Mm-hmm. Toronto's got its little things too. It's not quite as in your face about it, I guess, as New Orleans is. But definitely you will see or you will feel as you walk through some of the neighborhoods, especially some of the older neighborhoods in Toronto, that there's some very active, spirit presences going on there. So it's an interesting place. And
yeah, we've had some pretty rough poltergeist cases up there, and and this has been years ago. But yeah, we even some shadow folks, shadow people, and even the whole way out into oh God, what is that out there? Just before you get into Manitoba, the lake area. Was that Kelowna? Is that what it is? I forget the name of it.
Kelowna's in British Columbia.
Yeah, Conawa. I forget. But
I don't know. I'm still learning my Canadian geography, honestly.
I worked a case out there, and but we've done a lot of cases, and I think the most interesting thing that I've ever heard coming out of Canada. And I have a friend who's Ontario, and he told me about the Ottawa Angel. Did you ever hear that phenomenon?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In fact, didn't you cover that in the blog?
I did.
I think it's actually in the book too.
Yeah, it is.
That was a really bizarre story because this lady's driving down the highway between one city and the other, and sees this massive winged being basically coming for a landing.
Yeah.
One of the things that really struck me about that story was, two things actually struck me about this story. One was the sort of shape-shifting aspect to it, because when she first saw it, her impression of it was that it had sort of mist for legs. And then as she watched it, as it came down to land, it became more and more apparent that this thing had legs. The other thing was, this is one of those things where you look at it and you go, wait a minute. Now, the intelligence behind this phenomena, whatever it is, wanted this creature to be seen. Because if it hadn't wanted to be seen, it could have landed, a half mile away in a forested area, and nobody would have ever seen it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
But it chose to plop itself down right next to a freeway full of cars, so much so that the witness in that particular case actually, almost ran into, another driver who was also staring at this thing instead of paying attention to where they were going. They're on the freeway, they're 90, 100 kilometers per hour in that particular area. So that, it's one of those things that you hear about it, and the description is that it's large, it's winged being. You called it the Ottawa Angel, but the description that this woman gave was that this thing had a very disdainful look on its face, almost like it's like, well, I can't be bothered with these petty humans, and so. In cases of angelic contact, the feeling is usually a lot different than that. So I don't really know what she saw. Yeah,
I mean, the image that was, the sketch that I received was made by somebody else who said they had seen it, but I don't know if they really got a great look at it, but I think they went by what her description was. But from what I understand, several people had seen it, and a lot of people didn't come. And in fact, there was a similar sighting over in the Niagara area of New York, along the freeway, the road that goes out onto the thoroughway out of Buffalo.
Yeah, I wouldn't be at all surprised. I used to live in Angola, which is not a little south of Buffalo, right on the shore of Lake Erie, and so I used that 90 corridor a good bit. I can tell you from experience, having lived in that area, which is, we're getting off the topic of Canada, but I'll go down this rabbit hole for just a minute. Particularly around time periods like Halloween or Samhain or whatever you want to call it, you definitely there were some strange things going on in that state park. It was the Evangola State Park. I lived right next door to the park, and you would hear bizarre sounds. I was walking down the road to go to the bus stop one morning, and I heard something that sounded, for all the world, like the best way I could describe it is like a dinosaur or a dragon exhaling off in the woods. Now, I have no idea what that sound was. Could have been some kind of natural animal. I have no idea. What I can tell you is that now I'm, I've done wilderness search and rescue. I've spent, time outdoors in the Superstition Mountains, camping out. I've been out in the wilderness in the dark many, many, many times, right? And it doesn't spook me. I had a week, actually 2 weeks out of the year, once in the fall and once in the spring, where for whatever reason, I could not have my windows open at night. I had to pull the shades, had to pull the curtains. Just completely creeped out, couldn't look out the windows, didn't want to know what was out there. I had to keep the curtains closed. And it was just for a week, once in the fall, once in the spring. It's like, Sasquatch migration time. I don't know. Could have been any number of things.
I will tell you this. I have been working a case around Angola for about 3 years now. There's a gentleman whose grandfather owns a campsite there.
Okay.
And I think they have trailer parks and stuff. But they have been having Sasquatch issues for years.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised. It's a really dense area, a lot like the forest up here. And it's it would be prime habitat for whatever Sasquatch is. Whatever you think that Sasquatches are, whatever it is, they seem to like that dense forest wilderness kind of aspect. So yeah, it would be prime habitat for that stuff. We had weird calls and that kind of stuff in the neighborhood. And, I'm not saying it's one thing or the other. It could have been an owl for all I know. We were standing out on our back deck one night, and there was something coming down the road behind us that we could hear. And it sounded for all the world like the raptors from Jurassic Park.
Oh, Jesus.
And I was like, wait a minute, what the hell? Yeah, so it scared my son so bad he ran back in the house. So I went on a hunt, and apparently there's something called a northern hawk owl that makes a sound that's very similar to that. And I gotta believe that's what it was, because we had owls and stuff all in the neighborhood. You'd hear them hooting and hollering all the time. So I gotta believe that's what it was, because otherwise we had dinosaurs running loose out there.
Well, that's not good.
Yeah, that would not be good, especially not raptors.
No.
That would not be my cup of tea. Thanks. That's on my nope list.
Okay, Bernadette,
so Travis, in your research, yes. So in your research, have you encountered any reports about Wendigos?
Like I said, I left the Wendigo to Chad Lewis. Now, a lot of people, because he just published a book on that, it's excellent. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it, because it's got all kinds of lore about the Wendigo in it. Obviously, the Wendigo stories are part of Native American lore in Canada and the northern United States. And again, you can go round and round about what a Wendigo is, because there's such a thing as a Wendigo psychosis, which is actually a mental illness that causes people to have sort of these horrible cannibalistic kind of cravings, basically. And there's a strong belief amongst Native people that the Wendigo is not only a solid being, a spirit of starvation, basically, but also is a spiritual being that's capable of possessing people and causing what you would call a Wendigo psychosis. There's tons of stories available, and again, I refer you to Chad Lewis's book, because it's got a pretty exhaustive account of the Wendigo and the places that he went to that were related to Wendigo lore and so forth. I highly recommend that book. But I did not run across any Wendigo stories in my research, really, because I wasn't looking for them. I just had so much other stuff that I decided I would focus there instead of going over things that somebody else had done.
So what about the ghost ships? I know you mentioned those.
Okay. So, a lot of people are interested in paranormal lore, right? The subset of paranormal lore that's phantom ships is really interesting to me. And one of the most famous cases is up in Nova Scotia, which is on the Atlantic. It's the Atlantic one of the Atlantic provinces. And this is a ship. It's generally depicted or reported as a 3-masted sailing vessel, pretty good sized sailing vessel. And the people that see it, if I remember right, it's called the Phantom Ship of Northumberland Strait. The people that see this vessel always see it on fire. One of the books that I refer to, a couple are there, they're in their hotel room, they're getting ready for bed, they look out their window that has this beautiful view out over the strait, and they see the ship on fire. And they call up the local Coast Guard and report it. And the guard asks them, well, describe the ship, and they describe the ship, and they're like, oh, that's the phantom ship that people see out in the strait all the time. It's okay. It's not an actual emergency. I love that story. This thing was so real looking, though, that a rescue party did launch out of Charlottetown Harbor at one point, approached the vessel. And this was a story that I wish I had read before, because it would have gone neatly into my book, Mysteries in the Mist. They have approached the vessel, and they got close enough to where they actually felt the heat coming off of this flame. And they were puzzled because nobody was jumping overboard. The vessel was obviously lost. It was in full flame. There was no way they were going to save this boat, right? They got close enough to feel the heat, and suddenly this fog bank kind of descends over this vessel. And when it lifts, it's gone. The vessel has completely disappeared. There's also a story about this phantom ship of Northumberland that one of the ferries that goes back and forth between the islands of Nova Scotia actually, had a sighting of this thing, and they put radar on it to try and see if they could get a ping, some kind of return that they could verify. And of course, they have people watching this vessel burn, and there's nothing on radar. There's absolutely nothing there. So Phantom Ship of Northumberland Strait, the great phantom ship story. And oddly enough, the Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and so forth also have phantom trains, which seem to be, in some cases, death portents. There's a story from Prince Edward Island near the town of Wellington where people would see, well, the story starts with people celebrating a wedding, and then they're done celebrating the wedding, and then they go to, they basically have a funeral for a young man who's drowned, right? And while they're doing this, they notice this train pulling up to the station when no train is scheduled, and this train makes no sound. There's nobody on board the train, but the lights are on. Well, this begins a pattern in this area of this train appearing on the tracks and moving along, not making any sound. Lights are on, but nobody's visible in the train. And this happens year on year in December, typically. And people who lived up in the hills above the tracks would see the train, and some people would try to go down and get a better look at it. But the people that were standing close to the tracks couldn't see it, but the people who were still up on the hillsides could. Now, I found this really interesting because this actually happened in as I said, in Prince Edward Island. It happened in December, which is, one of those traditional times of that period between Samhain, like the end of October, early November, through to the winter solstice in December, was traditionally a time when the dead were more free to walk the land. So I found it interesting that this phantom train stopped at a station and seemed to be picking people up, although you couldn't see anybody in the train, and then would go on in the month of December. There's another phantom train story from Nova Scotia where people actually were seeing this train for a period of time until a young man or another person actually died in a railway accident. The train appeared one more time and seemed to stop at a station, and then it disappeared forever and was no longer seen again. So phantom ships, phantom trains, all kinds of fun stuff. There's sea monsters off the coast of Nova Scotia. It's like, if you start digging into the strange stuff in Canadian lore, you find all kinds of interesting things.
Oh, you hear of all kinds of crazy stuff in the Maritimes. I mean,
oh yeah.
Even inland. I've been involved with the Bigfoot habituations up in Nova Scotia. I have talked to military people from the U.S. who were stationed up at Goose Bay up in Labrador, and they'd be doing training with the Canadian troops, and they'd be running into all kinds of stuff up there. Just not Bigfoot, all kinds of other things.
Yeah, Goose Bay's famous for its UFO encounters too.
Absolutely. And when you talk about Nova Scotia, you got to think of Sag Harbor and the USOs and everything there.
Oh, yeah. That's a great story.
It is.
And again, that one's included in the book as well. I've got Shag Harbor and
Shag Harbor. I'm sorry.
And the Falcon Lake incident are both in the book, along with several other, quite a number of other UFO stories.
Stephen Mahaly, can you tell the folks a bit about that?
About Falcon Lake?
Yeah.
So this guy is an engineering sort of fellow, right? So all I can figure from reading the various accounts of this incident is that this guy must have run around with a whole bag full of instrumentation, because so he's out at Falcon Lake, which is in Manitoba, and he's doing some amateur prospecting stuff. And he sees, if I recall, 3 of these vessels approaching the lake. And 2 of them continue on in different directions. And he's puzzled by these because he has no idea what they are. A third one actually comes in for landing, not too far from where he's doing his prospecting. Wise man that he is, he hides in a bush for a while, and he observes this thing. So your classic dish-shaped sort of flying saucer thing that landed on the shore of Falcon Lake. His testimony was that it seemed to be super hot, like there were waves of heat coming off of the object. He observed this thing for something like 30 minutes, and saw a hatch open in the side of it. He thought that he heard voices, so he finally comes out from cover. He walks up close to this ship, vessel, craft, whatever you want to call it, and he greets whoever's inside. You can see there's like control panels and that sort of thing. He greets whoever's inside. Guy speaks several different languages, so it's like English and Russian and German and maybe Italian. I don't remember all the different languages, but 4 or 5 different languages that he speaks to these people in, or he speaks in trying to contact somebody inside this craft. As soon as he does this, the hatch seals, and he notes that it's as if there was no door there at all. There's no seam. There's nothing that he can see. It's a little engineering. I can almost see him taking his magnifying glass out and looking. Right. There's no seam that he can find where this door was previously. It turns, and we don't know if it's a propulsion or if it's an exhaust vent or whatever, but he gets blasted by hot air coming out of this vent, sort of aperture on the UFO. It sets his clothes on fire. It knocks him to the ground, and this thing takes off into the sky and flies away. And he rolls around and puts the fire out. Must have been a pretty tough guy, because he gets up and he walks off. You know, he's like, oh, well, I've had enough of this. Oh, I forgot to mention one thing. He gets close enough to this UFO to actually touch it. And he does that with special gloves that he had in his magic bag of tricks. And the thing is so hot that the glove literally slides off and like melts off of it. So he's, you know, like, oh, wow, you know, okay, I don't want to lay a bare hand on this thing. It takes off, it vents on him, it sets his clothes on fire. He goes off, he puts the fire out. He goes back to his vehicle. By the time he gets back there, he's feeling really ill. And, you know, long story short, he ends up in the hospital. If I recall, he lost something like 20 pounds, and his doctors were like, we're not sure what the heck happened to him, but it looks like he had some sort of, it looked like he had, you know, radiation burns is basically what the doctors concluded was wrong with him. And he, you know, he had those scars that you're seeing in the picture for quite a number of years. The Lorenzens, who did some research into this case, actually spoke with him, and he still had the scars at that time several years later. So, you know, it's a very up close, very personal. He didn't see any entities coming out of the craft or in the craft, but he got really close to this thing, and he paid the price for it.
Yeah, it's an interesting case. It really is.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as actual contact with the craft and such, I mean, he had the scars to prove it. And
he even had welding glasses in his little bag of tricks, right? So he was looking at this thing, you know, when it was, I was amazed at the number of things that he pulled out of this bag during the course of his testimony. An interesting thing about Canada, though, is a lot of people don't know, is that Canada has a pretty advanced aerospace program. And there was actually a company, if I remember right, it was called Avro, that was trying to develop in the 50s or 60s a circular flying craft. Now they gave it up as a loss, according to official sources, but you know, the Falcon Lake story makes me wonder if you know, somebody in the government might not have thought that this was still a great idea and been experimenting with this with these kind of craft after the Avro program closed down. Right. So, you know, because obviously he ran into something that really toasted him. That's a great picture.
Yeah, I've never seen that one before.
You know, he ran into something that really toasted him and had a very physical effect on him. So there's lots and lots of.
I've actually never seen any of this.
I'm sorry?
I've actually never seen any of this. It's the first time I've ever heard of this. So
yeah, that's those are some good pictures.
Yeah.
It was. There's actually a ton of there's several sections of UFO stuff in the book. The UFOs up in Canada in the same kind of aspect as UFOs in the United States seem to be really interested in nuclear power and nuclear weapons. Yeah, as I mentioned, there was there were more than one sighting up in the Goose Bay area up in Newfoundland, Labrador.
My dad was stationed up there in the early 50s.
Oh, yeah? Yeah. So,
I heard a lot of stories from him, but then I talked to several service people who did, I guess they bivouacked with a lot of the Canadian forces up there.
Yeah,
they do have a joint,
Yeah, it was a joint military task force
Yeah.
up in that area. So, there were lots of Canadian forces people up there, as well as lots of U.S. people, and apparently the U.S. military used that as a way station, kind of refueling station for planes that were coming across the Atlantic. To then continue on. One of the stories was I think it was a C-130. No, it was a jet aircraft. I don't remember exactly what it was, but
They had a big crash up
cargo
there.
plane. Yeah.
Yeah, cargo plane crashed up there. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's all kinds of stories of UFOs up that direction. There's a great story from Montreal, Quebec, of like a giant mothership type UFO that appeared over a major hotel in downtown Montreal. I think that was covered on the TV show Sightings. But they had the hotel security as witnesses. They had Montreal police as witnesses. They had the local RCMP officer up there, all of them standing and looking at this giant, whatever it was, set of lights that were hovering over this hotel that, eventually drifted off into the snow that was starting to fall. Interestingly enough, after that incident occurred, there was a power outage not far from that area, and the only power trunk line that was affected was a trunk line that went to one of the local military bases that stored nuclear weapons. So it's like, okay, maybe they don't like nuclear weapons. There's also some UFO sightings close to nuclear power plants in Ontario. One where it actually made it into the log of the nuclear plant. UFO seen today at 0700. So they actually logged it in their duty log for the day. Interesting thing about that one was this thing dropped something into the lake, and then there were several witnesses that testified that it kept coming back and seemed to be looking for whatever it dropped in the lake. Now of course everybody says, "Oh, well, they must have dropped a probe to monitor the nuclear power plant." Yeah, I'm always like, this is one of the things that really puts me off the extraterrestrial hypothesis. If a really super advanced race of people from another planet or another galaxy or whatever, who were capable of bridging interstellar space and reaching our planet and hanging out with us featherless bipeds, a group of people with technology like that should be able to find their own probe when they come back to look for it.
You'd think.
Better yet, why do they need to drop a probe at all? Why don't they just fly over the power plant and take readings? It's like, it's not like we can do anything about it. None of our military have ever been able to catch one of these things, not even close. So, But
I've got a question from Moon Medicine I think they tried to get me to ask this question a couple weeks ago. Any reports of dogmen on spacecraft?
Not that I know of.
Yeah, not that I know of either. I've had some dogman sightings up there, but I never had anything involved with a spacecraft.
I haven't, and dogmen are one of my, I prefer man wolf, but dogmen are one of my, because dogmen's kind of like Bigfoot, Yeah. I rarely use the term Bigfoot. I like Sasquatch a whole lot better, just because it seems, I'm an animist, so I have this thing about being respectful to beings, whether they're spiritual beings, physical beings, or whatever. So the dogman thing is one of my areas of obsession, I guess. I mean, those of us who know, who have followed my career know my first book was on phantom black dogs. And I did do a lot of research reading Linda Godfrey and those kinds of authors about dogmen. I have never, there are reports of Sasquatch being seen in conjunction with anomalous lights and UFOs, but I've never run across anything about the man wolf or the dogman being associated with either UFOs or any other kind of flying craft, or even anomalous lights. Really,
I
they
haven't
seem
either.
to be a thing. They seem to be a thing all their own.
I've got my next book is going to be on cryptic canines.
Okay.
And I don't know I don't think I've ever come across any of that. You know, I might go back and go through all of the archives and the research and find one, but I can't think of one.
Yeah, and I've searched your blog any number of times in the course of doing research, and I can say pretty thoroughly that I have no encounters of man-wolf type creatures being seen in the vicinity of a UFO or any other kind of craft. The thing that seems to be the linking phenomena for the dogman or man-wolf is burial sites, particularly Indian burial sites, native burial sites, the burial mounds. So yes, that's my other book. One of my other books.
I have got several stories of cryptic canines being around Ojibwe, Algonquin burial sites up in Ontario.
Yeah, and then down in the States, there's the association with the various burial mounds in the Midwest and so forth. In fact, one of Linda Godfrey's earliest historical cases was in the early, I want to say 1930s, where fellow was patrolling the grounds of it had been a residential school or I don't remember exactly what it was. I'm pulling this from memory, but comes across something digging in what later proved to be a burial mound.
Yep.
And he approaches this thing with his flashlight in hand and shines a light on and comes face to face with an upright canid, which of course scared the bejabbers out of him, especially when it looked at him and said something like Gadara. We don't have many reports of man-wolf creatures talking, but that's one that Godfrey mentions.
Yeah, if you watch the film that Small Town Monsters did with Linda was in it, she did discuss that. That case in particular was pretty interesting.
Yeah, that case is really interesting. That the picture you were just showing was an illustration of one of the Beast of Bray Road illustrations.
Sightings.
Yeah, it's one of her illustrations of Beast of Bray Road sighting, where the canid was supposed to be dining on roadkill, basically, which seems to be a thing up in Wisconsin. But
what do you think they get out of it, though? Sorry.
Do what?
What do you think they get out of it? Going and digging into burial mounds and things like that. What do you think they're trying to get out of it?
I think that, and this is where people are going to accuse me of being woo, but I think that
don't worry about that.
Like I said, animist here, I believe that we are surrounded by a world full of spirits, and that some of those spirits have the capability to move back and forth between their reality and ours. I think that the man-wolf or dogman is actually something that has either been created or invoked by native medicine people to guard those burial mounds. And they've probably lost some power over the years, but they're still, you notice that in most of these man-wolf sightings, the thing will charge people, it will growl at people, scare the bejesus out of them. But Godfrey makes a point of saying that she has only one case where, and that was in Canada actually, only one case where a man-wolf actually injured somebody. It'll chase people up trees, and it's obvious from the way people describe this creature that if it wanted to catch you, it could. Its object is to scare you away from whatever it is that it's protecting, whether that's a piece of land or a burial site or whatever. Its goal seems to be to get you to go away. The gentleman in Quebec actually emailed Godfrey and said that he'd been on a hike in a wilderness area in Quebec and he'd encountered one of these creatures. and it charged down the path toward him and grazed him with a fang as it went by. So it was almost accidental, right? It left a 4-inch gash in his hip, and he told the rangers and the doctors and stuff that he'd been attacked by a bear because he didn't want to tell them what he actually saw.
Right.
Godfrey tried to get further information from this fella, but he wasn't forthcoming. And you know how it is. Sometimes somebody will email you, I saw this thing and this is what happened. And then you get, void silence after that. But that's the only case that Godfrey reported, and the only case that I've seen where someone was actually injured by a man wolf. Now, we know that there are lots of instances of people actually disappearing in the woods, and we don't know what causes that. So we can't say for sure that these creatures are entirely harmless. And I sure as heck would want to run into one when it decided to do that bluff charge thing.
I'll be honest with you. It's one cryptid I have no desire to be in front of. Some of the stories that I've heard around here, literally, it's just, they're terrifying.
Yeah, if I could watch it from a deer blind up high somewhere where I knew it couldn't get to me, and I had a nice set of binoculars and I could scope it, I'd be very happy with that. I don't want to get into close proximity.
Well, I mean, I've had hunters who've been in deer blinds and are afraid to take a shot at it.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, for one thing, why would you?
Well, that's true.
I mean, do you really want to take a chance of ticking this thing off?
Well, it's just like anybody with a Bigfoot. I mean, I wouldn't even dream of doing that. And I've encountered one, and if I had a gun, I'd never shot this thing.
Yeah, and the people who claim to have actually shot one, almost invariably, this is one of the things that I'll talk just for a minute. I actually am, as I said, working on a book about Sasquatch in Canada, and some of the sightings that happen outside of British Columbia. One of the things that struck me was that there will be one story in this book about someone who actually claimed to have killed a Sasquatch by accident. He thought it was a moose. He thought it was the back end of a moose, and he fired on it. He was a 17-year-old, new to hunting, got excited and shot this thing. And, this was right after World War II. And he claims that, he brought this creature down with single shot. Hit it in the spine. Of course, he was hunting moose illegally, so he was afraid that he had killed, like a wild man or a feral human. So he just backed away from this and went his way and didn't tell his story for something like 40 years. So the times that I've seen that people claim to have shot one of these things, it's been, basically a case of mistaken identity. If you actually get face to face with one and put a scope on it, I have yet to encounter a story where the hunter could pull a trigger, because they claim that they look too human to shoot.
I can attest to that.
Yeah,
I can attest to that.
I haven't actually run into a Bigfoot, but I can't I can't imagine that I could do that. I can't imagine that I could shoot one. First of all, because I don't think it would do anything. But secondly, in the event that you could bring one down, I just don't. I can't imagine that. I just can't imagine myself doing that.
No.
I know that a lot of people claim that the only way you're going to prove that Sasquatch exists is to do the bring the body in, and I wish them good luck. I don't think it's going to happen.
It's going to be hard to do.
Yeah,
I got a question here from Thomas Carroll, and going back to the canines. Could some man wolf even be the result of a curse in some cases?
Okay, so to answer that question, you have to know something about magical theory.
Mm.
Now, anybody who's interested in the interface between magic and paranormal and these beings that we see out there, I highly recommend a book called Monsters, an investigator or a field investigator's guide to magical beings by John Michael Greer. Even if you don't agree with everything Greer says, and I don't, that book will give you a completely different idea about some of the stuff that people are seeing out there.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about vampires, he talks about werewolves, and he talks about mermaids and all kinds of other stuff, angels, demons, ghosts, all those kinds of things. So Greer, talking about werewolves particularly, has a theory that there are people who have an ability to create an etheric shell around themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the etheric layer of reality is the layer just beyond the layer that we're sitting in right now. And it's basically it's the matrix that, creation pours energy into to form our physical reality. So there are certain people who have the magical ability to, or have been taught the magical ability to create an etheric shell that has a particular form to it. And it's actually possible for someone to form an etheric shell that looks like what we would say a man-wolf looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Could you do that by cursing somebody else? I think that's probably a stretch.
Mm-hmm.
But it might be that some of the things that people are seeing out there that, are, look like a werewolf, that people say look like a werewolf, actually are people that have this ability. We saw, in the spiritualists in the physical medium period that, they use this sort of ether, or what did they call it? I need a paranormalist. Ectoplasm.
Mm.
To form hands and things like that
Mm-hmm.
they could actually do handprints with and stuff like that. It's the same kind of idea. So it's possible that there's a magical interface with some of these man-wolf sightings. But like I said, I personally think it's some kind of a spiritual being that walks, between the worlds and is capable of manifesting on our plane.
Well, I think most cryptids are, for the most part. I think there is a definite supernatural aspect to most of these things. Of course, I believe there are areas where they are indigenous, and but what I think people are seeing, let's say around this area, I just have not seen the evidence that there's a place where they're actually living at, or there's something else going on. And look, we're working on four cases here in Pennsylvania right now,
Mm-hmm.
canids.
Oh yeah,
and it's just hard for me to imagine that when these things manifest, they are seen, but there's something else that where they cloak or somehow go into another dimension, or something that's just keeping them from being seen.
Yeah,
and I think that's a lot of what's really going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's almost like I've noticed that you've had this surfeit of sightings in Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like somebody opened a portal on Chestnut Ridge or something.
It's been crazy.
Yeah, and that's another another thing that I bring out. I talk about a little bit in my Black Dog book, for instance, the idea that we're in a renaissance of magical practitioners right now. Mm-hmm. If you walk into a bookstore, almost any large, Barnes and Noble, or what do we have? We have Chapters up here. Bookstore, they have an occult section or an esoteric section that has books on ceremonial magic and Wicca and Santeria and all kinds of other things, other magical styles that people can get involved in. Now, unfortunately, some people don't take this these kinds of practices as seriously as they ought to, and they don't practice good hygiene. They don't open their doors and close their doors as they ought to. Yeah, the 72 seals of the Goetia. So they don't open their doors and then close their doors as they ought to. And one of my theories is that, if you have that sort of thing happening on a regular basis, you create weak spots in the veil between the worlds. And who knows what that.
Whoop.
Oh no!
Did we just lose him?
Lost him.
Nope,
Oh,
here
there
I
he
am.
is.
Yeah, I don't know what happened.
Yeah.
I'll blame it on Vincent.
No, it was I walked through one of those doors by
Yeah, you
accident.
did.
And I had to come back.
Yeah, he did. Oh, God.
But
I
yeah,
also
so-
don't think it's only like the bookstores. Oh, sorry. I only
Go ahead.
don't think it's the bookstores, but also TikTok. Like it's all
Oh,
over
yeah.
TikTok or
Well,
Witch Talk.
I
where
use
they
bookstores
give
as an example.
spells and-
There is
Yeah.
so much media available now. You can go to
Yeah.
websites. You can learn magical practices, all kinds of different ways. There are the TikTok witches, and there's a
Yeah.
wide, vast community of magical practitioners on Twitter. I know some of those folks. So yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of information out there. And unfortunately, some of that information is not necessarily correct or not necessarily complete. As I say, there's all kinds of opportunities for people to create these weak spots in the veil, and then who knows what you end up with. It depends on where that weak spot happens to be.
It happens. It definitely happens.
Well, I mean, look at the Navajo reservation. And now I'm getting completely off Canada again, but
Go ahead.
I mean, look at the Navajo reservation. I mean, you knew
JC.
JC, Four Corners
Mhm.
people. He had all kinds of wild stuff that was reported to him up there. Centaurs and dinosaurs and giant birds and dogmen and all kinds of things. And Bigfoot that disappeared in the middle of cornfields and all kinds of things. And what do we have in that area? Skinwalker Ranch, same thing. What do we have in that area? We have a long tradition of Native people doing ceremonies in those areas. And even if you do your things absolutely correctly, if you keep doing magic in the same place for long enough period of time, there's going to be that kind of weakness between the worlds, that weakness in the veil between the worlds. And so, it's been my theory for quite a while that some of the wild things that we end up seeing, or people end up seeing, are the result of things like that.
I agree. I agree
something
100%.
Something that popped through and said, "Hi, I'm a centaur," and then it popped back to wherever it came from.
Yep. So, Travis, before we go, why don't you tell the folks how they can get in contact with you and where they can get your new book and anything else you want to tell them about?
Okay, so the book is Canadian Monsters and Mysteries, and we actually did talk a little bit about Canada tonight.
Yeah, we did.
But if you're interested in UFOs, if you're interested in lake monsters, if you're interested in phantom trains and phantom ships, if you're interested in fairy lore, shadow people and UFOs and all that sort of thing, there's something in this book for you. It's called Canadian Monsters and Mysteries. It's actually available on Amazon, both as a Kindle book and as a paperback. If you happen to be a Kindle Unlimited subscriber, it's available on KU. As far as getting hold of me, I'm on Facebook as I have a W.T. Watson author page, or personally as Will Watson. Long story there. I'm on Twitter at W.T. Watson 2, and I'm on what is that thing? Instagram. The one with pictures. is an old handle of mine. It's Curunir60, CURUNIR60. And I'm happy to, to talk to people about their experiences if they like. I love it when people share stories with me. But also, subscribe to one of my social media accounts to keep track of what I'm doing. Because, like I said, I just continue to put out books.
Well, when the new one comes out, make sure you let me know again, and we'll have you back on and talk about Bigfoot.
I absolutely will.
Okay, well, you have a great weekend, and we'll be talking soon, okay?
Okay, thanks very much, Lon. You guys take care.
Mm-hmm.
Bye.
Now, if you have a sighting or encounter report and you'd like to be considered for the Personal Report Show, or even post it on the Families of Monsters blog site, feel free to contact me through my email at lonstrickler@familiesofmonsters.com. And I want to again thank W.T. Watson for joining me this evening, and thanks to each and all you for watching and chatting. Your support is what makes this possible, so please like, subscribe, share, and leave comments. Next Friday, we are going to have a Families of Monsters 14 research roundtable. And I think right now we've got James West, Kit Taylor, and Chad Redding scheduled to come on. Bernadette will be joining us as well. So, make sure to stop in, get your questions ready. We're probably going to have an extended show, so it should be interesting. So until next week, stay healthy and have a safe, enjoyable weekend. Good night.